Hey, what up YouTube? My name's Josh, and today we're going to be going over everything we know about Armored Core 6 so far. I'm going to try to focus on what you can expect from the games itself, like new features, returning features, and stuff like that. Things like how the game was in development for 6 years I'll be leaving out of the video. Same thing goes for references to older games. Things like "this reminds me of Armored Core 2" can all be found in my reaction video. The sources I'm going to be referencing are the new and original trailer, the IGN interview, the PlayStation interview, and the Italian interview. We're going to start with the most solid factual stuff and then move into the more speculative armored ring type talking points, where I'll be getting more opinionated. So to start things off, we have a release date. August 25th this year, which is right around the corner. Glad they didn't keep us waiting until the end of the year.
Kept you waiting, huh?
One thing that's talked about a lot between the different interviews is the game is a complete reboot of the series despite having the number 6 in the title. This is something that's very common for Armored Core, but I'm sure it's confusing to newcomers to the series. So yeah, it's a complete reboot. You don't need to play the previous games to understand anything. The game takes place 50 years after an extinction level event occurs on the planet Rubicon 3. The cause of this event is from a substance called coral, which is an extremely dangerous but very valuable source of energy. Fast forwarding to the present, this energy has been rediscovered, and different corporations from all over the universe are in a race to claim the planet for this exact resource. And then there's the native forces doing everything in their power to protect their planet. Different endings and mission paths will be unlocked one by one as you go through the game multiple times, which is something we've seen only in Armored Core for Answer. The game is going to be single player only, but will have an additional PvP arena where people can fight each other online, completely separate from the story. There's also a single player arena where the mechs you'll be fighting are in the story, but they won't be as difficult. From what they say, it's more for training purposes. In terms of mission structure, the game will still have the shorter missions we've come to expect, but also longer missions with checkpoints. I didn't think longer missions turned out great in Armored Core 5, but that game's main priority was multiplayer. Yamamura stresses there's more variety in the game's missions. Quote, "The maps are more complex this time around. There's a lot more verticality and they're more extensive. With all the money FromSoft has from Souls, no doubt they're able to pay out of pocket to craft these dense, detailed worlds, which with all the problems they've had from publishers in the past, I'm really excited for this entry." Moving on, multiple interviews stress that this is going to be an Armored Core game, not a Souls game, which is something we'll get into more detail towards the end of the video. Quote, "Armored Core offers two unique gaming experiences. First is this unique three-dimensional action that can only be achieved with mechs. And second is the ability to customize your own personal AC by combining multiple parts and decorating it to your liking with painting and decals and the like." One thing I love about Armored Core is there's a lot that goes into making an AC. Just explaining how all the different parts function would take a good 10 minutes, so maybe that's a video for another time. But throughout all the different interviews, we know for a fact that we will have the same amount of depth, if not even more than we had in the previous games. Creating your own custom emblem, adding decals, and even tuning will all be present in Armored Core 6. Also, legs will now vary up gameplay even more than they already did, with different legs possessing different traits. For example, these quad legs have some sort of hover mode transformation, and we can see tanks possess the ability to drift. For new players, this amount of customization might sound overwhelming, but the game will in fact have a tutorial not just to learn the gameplay, but also the process of customization. Also, the game's not going to have Souls level of difficulty right at the start, but will instead ease players in while they get more comfortable with the gameplay and customization. With how much the game's changing, there's no doubt even an Armored Core fan like me would get some use out of the tutorials. The gameplay of Armored Core 6 is going to be quite a lot different from previous games. On the surface, we see a perfect mixture of 4th and 5th generation Armored Core, with quick boosting, quick turning, primal armor, and assault armor, and the ability to fire heavy bat cannons on the move with bipedal legs. These are all things we would see in Armored Core 4 and For Answer. Also, from what it sounds like in one of the interviews, using bat cannons will be something you have to sacrifice tuning points for, which I think is a good way to balance it out. And then we also see things exclusive to Armored Core 5, like back hanger slots where you can mount regular arm weapons instead of being limited to weapons that can only be equipped on the back. We can also see a quick forward boost melee attack that would allow a mech to melee without having a laser blade, and even a return to the scan mode that hopefully won't have the same functionality as it did in Armored Core 5. Quote, "During the trailer there's also a scan. Is it a similar system to the one seen in Armored Core 5, or does it have different functionality?" Yamamura responds, yes. The scan you saw has other functions as well. You can use it to see the positioning of enemies behind obstacles, and it allows you to see the contents of containers, for example, which sometimes have parts or other objects inside them. So hidden parts are confirmed, which is just lovely. I can't wait to find the legendary Karasawa and even the more recognizable Moonlight Blade. I'm definitely going to take my time going through the campaign to try and find all these hidden parts. But on the topic of scan mode itself, I'm not going to give a 5-paragraph essay on how it wouldn't make sense being in the game, but it has to do with the 3 damage types and recons and how it would ruin the flow of the game, and how primal armor is already in the game, and etc and etc. If you're really interested, you can read me bickering about it in the comment section, I'm sure. So as I was saying, if scan mode isn't exactly how it was in 5, we have a perfect mixture of the 2 previous generation Armored Core games combined into one. Despite all that, it looks like the gameplay won't be like any of the previous Armored Core games. I'm just gonna quote a few things, then explain myself. Quote, "In the gameplay shown, there was no interface, yet enemy targeting felt extremely stable, almost as if it were fixed targeting. Will it be necessary to aim in this Armored Core and still depend on FCS, or have things changed? For anyone wondering, the FCS is what determines your lock-on capabilities in every Armored Core game. For example, some might have a wide lock box but not a far lock-on range, or vice versa." Yamamura responds later with this: "Speaking of aiming, Armored Core 6 is a very action-oriented game compared to the previous games. Therefore, rather than focusing on aiming, we will have to concentrate on the movements of the enemy and on finding the right window to attack. There will therefore be new elements related to this aspect. The bosses will be very different from previous Armored Core games. Something I pointed out in my reaction video is how this AC stays perfectly in line with the boss while it's overboosting towards it. This isn't something you would see in any of the previous Armored Core games. Some people might argue that it's possible to pivot in a direction while overboosting in Armored Core 4, but I doubt they retook this scene 30 different times to make it look this perfect. And on the topic of bosses being different from other Armored Core games, watch these few sections of the trailer while I read this quote. This is from Yamamura. "The pace of attacks and defense against enemies is much more intense than in the past. The flow of battles in general is more rhythmic, so overall the speed perceived during battles is comparable to that of Armored Core 4. I think combat will feel pretty fast." If that didn't sound like something you'd see out of FromSoft in the last decade, then let me feed the fire a little bit more. This is from PlayStation. "Another addition to the series combat is a stagger element. If an AC takes too many hits over a short period of time, its attitude control system will be overloaded, making it vulnerable for a short time. Both continuous hits and big powerful strikes will cause stagger damage, encouraging you to keep up the pressure on the opponent. The damage inflicted to an enemy's stagger gauge varies from weapon to weapon. It can also be affected by factors like distance, adding additional strategy in equipping and using these armaments in combat." We can see an example of this in the trailer where this lightweight AC gets behind this rolling droid and staggers it by using an energy shotgun. I imagine this will be similar to Dark Souls 1 poise mechanics, where you can walk through a certain amount of hits until you break through that poise threshold. This stagger is long enough to be followed up with a devastating melee attack. I'm sure these poise values will be much higher than they were in Dark Souls 1. People have also compared this to Sekiro's stance system, so maybe it's more like that. I haven't played Sekiro since release, so I'll let you guys be the judge of that. So all this combined, it looks like we'll in fact be getting Armored Souls, or maybe Armored Ring or Socorro would be a more fitting name. There will be a much larger focus when it comes to close range combat in Armored Core 6. There's this new ability called Assault Boost, and this clip may or may not be an example of the mentioned skill. Here's what PlayStation has to say about it. One of the biggest new features in Armored Core 6 is an instantaneous switch between long-range gunfighting and close-range melee, thanks to a button-activated movement skill called the Assault Boost. Quote from Yamamura, "Assault Boost is an offensive action that helps close the gap between enemies and lets you quickly go from long distance to close range. It'll also provide some incredible chain abilities when fighting. Say you activate Assault Boost to make your approach while using machine gun fire and missile salvos to stagger the enemy. Then use your pulse blade to score a direct melee hit once you're close up. Along with this new Assault Boost, there's going to be a lot of new melee and close range weapons added to the game. In the gameplay trailer, you can see an enemy using what I'd guess is the new lance weapon. Here's a twin blade an AC uses against this giant enemy possibly nicknamed the Wall. Here we see some footage of a whip, which is confirmed to be a new weapon. And if we look back at the first trailer, we can see the new cluster bomb dispenser. There's also back-mounted energy shields that look a heck of a lot more useful than they were in previous games. The reason why shields are now equipped on the back is probably due to the fact that melee weapons can only be held in your left hand, kinda like the older PS2 games. But you will not be required to use a melee weapon, as we can see in the trailer. Melee has never been super in-depth in the Armored Core series. Usually they're hard to hit with, but if you do, there's nothing quite like the damage you get. It was always high risk, high reward, but it seems like with all the new weapons and the stagger mechanic, it's going to be a much more fundamental part of the game. So with all that said, what's my opinion on all this? 50% of Armored Core is customization, and they hit the nail on the head. Other games have so much depth when it came to making an AC, but by the sound of it, this game is going to take it one step further. What you decide to go out on a mission with will change everything, like using an energy shield to block attacks instead of taking a more powerful back weapon. The difference in leg types is even more diverse than it already was in the previous games. The other half of the game though is gameplay, and there's just not a lot to go off of. Like, how the heck is this AC firing both its right side weapons at the same time? Things like Assault Boost and Poise are drastic changes where until we get our hands on the game we won't know how they function for sure. There's solid evidence to point towards a Souls-style lock system, and I don't know that will translate well into Armored Core. The Souls lock-on works great for a Souls game where you're fighting an enemy on the ground and just have to worry about your left, right, forward, and back, but in Armored Core that wouldn't really work when you have things like buildings all around and a ceiling you won't be able to see if your enemy's underneath you, which makes me think as much as they say you'll be able to fly freely, there'll be some serious limitations when it comes to boss fights or combat that you have to be locked on for. We see that quad legs transform into a more floaty hover mode. Does this really look like free flying through the air? And what are these jump pads for? If they're for tanks, does that mean tanks won't be able to fly? If so, then is free flight even gonna be interesting if half the leg types have severe limitations with vertical movement? I think the biggest issue I have is when they say they're focusing on a more reactionary style with the boss fights, which is of course something we've seen in every Souls game. One thing I've loved about Armored Core bosses is how much creativity they had to put into them to make them interesting, like Spirit of Motherwill for example, or this boss from Armored Core 3 that dives underwater and you have to wait for it to resurface while dodging its attacks, or the underground giant MT fight that had you frantically attacking it while you boosted backwards dodging obstacles. I understand that a lot of these bosses weren't fully fleshed out, but I was kind of hoping that's something Armored Core 6 would improve upon. I mean, just imagine how much better the Capricorn fight would be if they restricted your aerial movement a bit. It would have made for a damn good fight, and it's still an interesting fight, it just wasn't delivered well. If there's one change I've seen in the Souls series, it's they've gotten less creative with their boss fights, in trade for just making them more rhythmically difficult, if that makes sense. Remember the Phalanx fight from Demon Souls that was a big blob of shield enemies that were also weak to fire, and a level that gave you tons of fire items? Remember the Taurus demon that was incredibly hard to fight until you noticed the ladder directly behind you that led up to a more open area? I'm not shitting on Elden Ring, but you have to admit almost every boss fight turned into an anime character. These fights weren't really anything special, but would put you in the zone. And you know what I mean when I say the zone. It's that extreme level of focus where 100% of your brain is just focusing on the boss's telegraphed attacks. And I'm sorry to say, I don't want that in an Armored Core game. I want bosses with interesting designs and creative ways to overcome them. I know this is where people will probably disagree with me the most, but that's the way I feel. One thing that kind of puts my mind to rest though is this quote. The series' big boss encounters are back, and the metal monstrosities you'll encounter look bigger and more intimidating than ever. But yeah, that's it, so hopefully you guys enjoyed the video or at least learned something new. This next part of the video is for the people that watched my previous live stream, so if that's not you, I'll talk to you later. Okay, you're still here? Alright then. So, my previous live stream I ended up getting white girl wasted and blacking out. My buddy told me I was still streaming when he woke up in the morning, which means for about 7 hours I was completely blacked out. Drunk me deleted the video, so I have no clue how badly I embarrassed myself, or if I said something I shouldn't have. I did manage to find a few seconds in my stream, and this is what it was.
You fucking stupid bitch! This stupid fucking justice of fucking righteous fucking Alex is doing this shit!
Nah, but seriously, I am really sorry. This is something I could have easily swept under the rug since I'm such a small channel, but that just wouldn't sit right with me. The Bible tells me to be sober and be vigilant, and with my alcohol addiction, I've obviously fallen pretty short. So yeah, I'm really sorry if I offended you guys, or if I threw up on camera or something. I'll do my best to make sure it doesn't happen again. But yeah, thanks for watching the video, peace out.